there is much light around, we forget until we go to somewhere like Stonehenge or close to where I am, New Grange, what it meant to walk in the shadow of death, to go into the beyond, trying to hope for something and feeling one's way through the mist. Now, this is a very strange feast, for we are actually celebrating, as well as the King of Kings himself, these other kings who were coming from a misty past. And yet the Lord could get through to them. Were the Zoroastrians. I'd like to pause on two specific things briefly. One is the fact that the Lord has given us in our life two bits of Eden not quite lost. One is our capacity to reason correctly, and the other is our capacity to create beauty. He used both in this occasion when he was able to get through to their brain through what they were calculating correctly, it would seem, and also give them more. These were coming from different kingdoms, and at that time they had no means of communication between them, and yet they were following the same thing. And they were coming a long way to a very odd situation. Of course, they went to the likely place, the palace where Herod was. But that wasn't to be the place, and there was this objective sight leading them on, similar actually to what we find in the Pentateuch. God was leading his people physically. Now that's important, because that bit that we have with all humanity, we have from Adam, and hasn't been quite lost. It can be somewhat damaged by the elements of passion, making it swerve. But in itself we do see fact. I make a tiny digression. If one looks around at what's been going on in the States now, it's rather interesting, because passions run high if one dares to say certain things, and yet all one has to do is observe fact. So passion can be used also in the form of dysfunctional dialogue. Raise your voice and obliterate. That means that there's bad will. One doesn't want to see fact. Now that's kind of important as we start a new year, knowing how to handle fact. Don't obliterate it with decibels. If a person can't speak without extra decibels, he doesn't want the fact. So the problem is there. I close that. But this bit here, God has given to humanity, and people all over the globe, at least if they're normal, can work things out. They can get also as far as the pre-Christian philosophers, hence the importance of this feast, to go as far upstream as a prime mover. Plato has it, Aristotle has it. It's somewhat obvious if one is not clouded by other things. Remember the prior in Aberystwyth saying, I've never yet to meet a man who doesn't believe in God. I remember also hearing this from a testimony of someone who was at Dunkirk when they were trying to get out of the blaze. There weren't any atheists at Dunkirk, he calmly said. Because man, before death, wakes up to its reality and sees things in a different light. There's something of the supernatural actually in that. Ask someone who is in an accident and he'll tell you. The other is beauty. Music is the language of beauty. Musike techne, the art of the muses. Now, this too we have not lost from Eden. All those who have had an experience of the beyond and going closer to heaven have heard beauty. Angelic harmony which we cannot produce on earth. And yet we can do a little of it. Just before we came, because of the feast of also the baptism and the first miracle of Canaan, all virtually present in this one big feast of manifestation, Epiphania. And because in Romania, Ukraine, Russia, and these places, the baptism and light element are very important, with people plunging into ice cold water on this day, and so on. I mentioned how actually I was baptized by total immersion, and I found on YouTube my chapel and showed the place where it happened, because in a Baptist chapel the Lord's table, the altar, is taken away and the carpet which is attached to the piscina is taken away. The whole thing comes up, and underneath you have a marble piscina, a place of baptism, similar to what they had in the early church, with steps on either side. And one goes in, the pastor is dressed in a special way, one is dressed in white, and one is plunged in after one's confession of faith, baptized in the name of the Trinity, and as one comes up, they sing in Welsh beautiful song of belonging to Jesus, following Jesus forever, and it's very moving. But that was brought in also in another context, because in showing that, I was also to show this other element, because Tabernacle Baptist Church is on YouTube, they're singing Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. Can be found out with that. And we can see the stained glass window of baptism and of the Last Supper. Beautiful stained glass windows in this massive chapel in the middle of Cardiff. And then one sees what happens when one on earth engages with the forces that God has given us to create glory for Him, and also consolation for ourselves. And one can see there the organist putting out one by one the stops, the conductor from the pulpit actually bringing all together into beautiful four-part harmony, and off they go, and we have liftoff, and the whole chapel vibrates. And I was explaining actually how we were able in that chapel to produce all kinds of things, because after the evening service, after a cup of tea, my mother would stay on for Ysgol Gân, the school of chant, that they would produce oratorios and all kinds of things, and they were well able to produce Handel's Messiah, and we played a part of that from someone else's recorded. And there it hit me again as I listened to this, how God has given to mankind something of His power and order. He gifts some members of mankind to enrich the whole of mankind forevermore with something of the glory of heaven. Some of these works, when executed, can't but make one feel, wow, this is something of home. And I remember actually in philosophy, in Aberystwyth, we were doing philosophy actually in Welsh there, and one of the boys in the class said, and he wasn't coming from particularly evangelical background, he was just a good man, but he did say this with regard to the argument from religious experience for the proof of God. He did say, in answer to the Prof's question, yes, I have had an experience of that nature when listening to the likes of Sibelius. In other words, purely neutral humanity is able to plug into something which draws forth the best of itself and makes it aware of something greater, a slightly mystical experience. This is actually deeply consoling, and I know here there's something more. Now, I make a jump to 2021. How many young people this year will have anything of that? not be more of banging movements, little value in lyrics. Is that elevating? It has been suggested that Lucifer may have been the angel of music. He certainly knows its power. I want to conclude. This is a feast when we actually have to do with the whole Christian bloc. And we need to look also to our Eastern brethren who have kept a lot of unchanging beauty and otherness. This incense, this myrrh, they know about it. Gold and preciousness, nothing being spared. And also our brethren who came out of us at the Reformation, they have kept bits well. They sing very well. So the great composers were actually Protestant Lutherans. It still works, and God meets them there. Let us do the same, and calmly rest on God, who is beauty itself. Sto parlando anche della grande Chiesa, quella del cielo e della terra, quello anche di tutti i riti, in cui siamo molto uniti creando bellezza. La bellezza è un linguaggio che abbiamo in comune con gli angeli e creiamo un'atmosfera in cui c'è qualcosa del cielo. È importante che si faccia il massimo e non il minimo quando siamo nel culto, per creare sulla terra un'atmosfera in cui anche gli angeli sono a casa loro. Now, bless the chalk